So, and I go ahead to introduce the next speaker. This is a good friend, a colleague that has done quite a lot. We actually, this talk that we're having today, we actually had to have it during our summit, but unfortunately, we ran out of time, and Joe, being so nice as he is, promised to give us a talk in one of our webinars. It has taken us quite some time to get this schedule out. I'm so happy that he was able to create time for today's session so we can have this talk. And Joe Ekpo is a senior infrastructure engineer.
Let me see my.
So Joe, once more, thank you so much for accepting to share this knowledge with us here in the community. We do appreciate that. And DevOps is the new trend, and a lot of people would like to definitely know what this is all about and how they can upgrade their skills to what the job market is actually requiring. And DevOps itself, it's a very wonderful tool that I feel most of us that are maybe already in this database field should have it in our tool set. So the floor is yours, Joe.
Okay. Hello everyone. Good evening from Chicago. I'm on Central Time, so good evening. I think I'm gonna probably share my screen. All right, good evening, thanks. Let me share my screen. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Just making sure everyone can see my screen. Okay. All right. So I call him Mr. KiawiTech. So as Mr. KiawiTech has said, he's a colleague of mine. We started in the early days. Initially, I started as more like a database administrator, and I was really more passionate, and I was really passionate and also an Azure, or let me say cloud enthusiast, in the sense that I really love the cloud. And because of the tech, the world is changing, right? So you need to be always up to date. You need to always grow your skill set in your environment. Whatever the opportunity presents itself, you need to be able to, you need to be very diverse in learning skills. So today, so he wanted me to teach on DevOps. I would give you more like an overview of myself. Currently, I'm a senior infrastructure cloud engineer, Azure lead primarily in my environment. I work for Blue Cross Blue Shield, Illinois headquarters. That's in Chicago. And also, I'm also an Azure architect, Azure solution architect, and also an Azure Ops expert. So Ops is more like an observability in the sense that when you want to monitor an entire environment, give assessment. So I'm also an expert to other client companies I also consult for. And you can see my background. I'm also from the MPIT Academy, that's Modern Pro IT. So what I'm going to be doing today is probably it's going to be more of a high level. And I know a lot of you might be Azure focused or SQL DBA or SQL developer. You might be an ETL developer, or you might be more like a code delivery specialist, or whatever skill set in the IT space you're doing. It's important you understand what's currently evolving in the environment. So that's why I'm going to be doing more like an intro to Azure DevOps. So Azure, and you can see on my screen, I'm going to be doing the solutioning, what Azure DevOps has to offer, what are the IAC modules and solution, and also I'm going to do show like a field demo. I'm not going to give more like a code related deep dive demo because it can be a little bit complicated. Azure DevOps is quite cumbersome. Terraform is quite cumbersome, so it's going to be all over the place to do that. I always go with my QA methodology in the sense that I like telling people I would have the questions if I have them. If I don't have the questions, I will do making a research. If there are any questions that comes to my table, I can answer at the moment. They are good questions I have good answers to, evidentiary answers, and life experience in my job experience. Great questions, something similar, but I can actually give you a use case where I actually did some hands-on work and was able to resolve whatever issue that might be. An interesting question, probably the question that I'm aware of, but I need to do more research and probably post it on, right? So what is Azure DevOps? So just for me to give more like a backtrack a little bit. So right now in the IT industry, it's important that you understand what automation is, what um, necessary coding skill set might be required in your job. Because right now in the job market, if you're a SQL database or you are just a Oracle database or you're a Postgres database administrator, you're so most of the coding skills might be required of you, and it's important you need to understand what Azure DevOps is because they are is a new tool, that also requires lots of skill set in coding and also automation and also infrastructure, which is very, very important that you need to understand, right? Because the world is changing. It's important that you need to know how to navigate, how to use these tools in your job environment. Take, for instance, if you are a database administrator, there are certain deployments that would require you to um, also work on-prem and also in the cloud. And I know most of the DBAs now, you don't want to streamline yourself to working on-prem. The world is changing. As I said earlier on, everyone is moving to the cloud. So even if you know how to do things in Azure in general or AWS, you need to know some skill set, which is Azure DevOps. Azure DevOps comprises of a list of solutioning tools that you need to be aware of, which helps your environment in building infrastructure, helping in provisioning state, how you provision resources. When I say provision, I simply mean what it takes for you to create something in your environment. Take, for instance, let's say an actual VM or a database that you want to create your environment. And take, for instance, you have, like you guys are probably, you have 20 DBAs or you have 50 DBAs, both onshore, offshore, operational design and build DBAs, ticket solution DBAs. So there are different types of DBA field that you could find yourself. So it's important that most of the it's important that you need to know how to provision things because most of the company would want to standardize their environment. And when I mean standardize their environment in the sense that if they say, okay, let's say, Mr. A, can you provision a SQL Server, a recent SQL Server, let's say SQL Server 2019 or SQL Server, there's a 2020 SQL Server right now, and they need you to spin that up to spec. So this tool is going to help you understand how you can actually build your code to provision those resources rather than just having the custom code or going to the portal and click and provision thing. So with this automation term framework, you understand what Azure DevOps is. So as you can see on my screen, Azure DevOps is more like an automation term framework where you are land in each of your resources from coding perspective to teamwork perspective. And when it comes to pipeline perspective, when you comprise all those frameworks together to deploy your resources, that's what Azure Framework is. It's probably Azure DevOps supports a collaborative culture and set of processes that bring together developers, project managers, contributors to develop softwares. It allows organization to create and improve product as a fast pace than they can with traditional software development approaches. You can work in a cloud using Azure DevOps services or on-premise using Azure DevOps Server. For more information, you can either Google, you can get more information on that. It's pretty easy to get those information in the web. So, so these are Azure DevOps features. I'm going to go each of the topics. I'm going to go through each of the topics so you understand what it offers, what are the standalone service that it can actually offer you. We have Azure Boards, we have Azure Repos, we have Azure Pipelines, we have Azure Test Plans, and Azure Actifat. As you can see on the screen, Azure Boards deliver a suite of agile tools to support planning and tracking work. So when you say agile tool, it's more like, I'm pretty sure most of you might understand what an agile methodology is. Methodology is in the sense that when, let's take, for instance, you have a project manager that's been onboarded into your company and you have a project where you need an application to be integrated to, let's say, SQL database. And the project is that they want to move the on-prem application, they want to move it over to the cloud, probably maybe not a lift and shift, probably they want to do more like a cloud first or cloud first approach solutioning. So with Azure Boards, you can follow through an agile methodology on creating packs, creating user stories. I'm going to go more on that. and how to easily deploy an application from on-prem to the cloud with different use case and test cases that you need to deliver in order for you to actually deliver the project. We have Azure Repo, which also can provide you more like a GitHub sort of repository feel. I'm going to go more deep into that. And we also have Azure Pipelines. We also have Azure Test Plans and Azure ActiveAct. So those are most of the features that you can see in Azure DevOps. So this is what we call Azure Boards. So Azure Boards provide software development teams with the interactive and customizable tool they need to manage their software projects. It provides a rich set of capabilities, including native support of Agile, Scrum, Kanban processes, calendar view, configurable dashboards, integrated reporting, and these two scales your business goals, or it scales your business goals or business need in your environment, whatever the use case might be, and quickly and easily track work issues and code defects associated with your project. The Kanban board shown in the following image is just one of the I'm going to show you a little bit of images to understand how it looks like. So as you can see, we're going to do it. I'm going to also show you a demo so you can actually see how Azure boards work. So this Azure board helps you to create, let's take, for instance, use cases, what it calls sprint in project management. So you can have let's say, various sprints, and you can have epic and user stories where the project manager will assign, let's say, Mr. A to Z, these project tasks, and everything would comprise as a well-coordinated delivery of work to a specific need of the project. So that's what basically Azure Board is all about. It helps you in tracking stories, bugs, and features and epics. As I said earlier on, track various types of work using default work items such as stories, bugs, features, and epic. So in a sense where you need to probably you want to work with certain developers, you're a database and you're a database administrator and you have developers that you want to work with. So your developer might be responsible for creating a code for you to deploy your database, or actually creating the code to create a, let's say, an Oracle or SQL instance. So once that code is ready, they will push that code, maybe to a pull request once it's been merged to a certain branch and validated and committed in that branch. I'm going to explain branch and other stuff later on. So once it's done, then that ties back to your work where you have to go in and run that code, make your certain deployment for you to provision that SQL instance. So that's probably the way it works. So it shows you how the epic can be created, how the work item can be created. And as you can see on my screen, there's what we call backlog. So let's take, for instance, once you're doing your work, you have issues, you have dependencies, then it would reflect what they are. And also you can give more details on this. And that's how Azure Board basically work. I'm going to run through this as quick as possible. Then we also have Azure Repos. So Azure Repos is probably like GitHub, right? I know most of you might have heard of GitHub a lot. So GitHub is more like an open source control code repository for the public, the general public, but there is more like an enterprise version. But for you to understand what the Azure Repo, which Azure DevOps provides, is that you need to understand that Microsoft made it in part of their solution delivery of product that they need an equivalent of GitHub, which is Azure Repos. So the repos is where you have a branch, you have, let's say, a project, and you have various branches. There's what we call feature branch, master branch. If you don't really understand that, maybe during the question and answer, you can ask me. I can give more information on that. But when you have those repository created, that's how Azure Repo works. So Azure Repo is a set of version control tool that you can use to manage your code, wherever you are, whatever, how large your project, big or small, or using version control as soon as possible is a good idea for what you want to do with Azure DevOps. So version control systems are software that helps you track changes you make in your code over time. As you edit your code, you tell the version control system to take a snapshot of the file. The version control system saves that snapshot permanently, so you can recall it later if you need it. Use version control to save your work and coordinate change across your team. So it's pretty much self-explanatory. So it's more like a code, like the way the other speaker was talking about how she was working with snowflakes, how she was writing the codes interpreting it to SQL and making those changes, truncate statement, all those changes can be tracked using Azure Repo. Once you have your repository is sort of like when you have a big space where you dump in logical files. And when I say logical, it's not hardware you can't touch a code, it's logical. So you save your bunch of logical script, your files, your code. Once you have that stored, you can edit, you can save that, you can deploy those to an actual pipeline, which I'm going to come later on. So with that Azure Repo, it helps you with so many integration layers where you can test your code. And once you test your code, you can test it to a staging area and you can retract that code in the sense that if you want to compare and contrast, maybe let's take, for instance, someone new comes into the company and make some changes. You can retract that code and re-implement the changes for you not to. So there's more like a version control. So you don't lose track of what code you have. And as a SQL DBA, as a SQL or SQL developer or an architect or an engineer, it's important you need to know how to work around with code repositories. You need to know what GitHub is, you need to know what repos are. So once you are being given access to do more like a pull request, you want to commit changes, you want to approve changes, you want to push your code to a staging area or to a production area, you basically know how to navigate your way around Azure Repo or GitHub, which I'm pretty much going to show you both of them side by side. So even if you're just a single developer, or if version control helps you to stay organized as you fix bugs and develop new features, version controls help you to keep history of your development so that you can review and enroll back to any version of your code with ease. So that's probably how Azure Repo works. It shows you how your codes are changing, how they are if there's a more like an issue. Take, for instance, maybe you've modified a code countless time and you can't understand or you get lost track of time on what was changed. You need to roll back to a certain code that you updated. You can go to the history and get that code back, and you can see how you can retrace it by creating multiple branches. So from there, you know you don't lose your work or corrupt a main or a dev branch, which I'm pretty much going to show you. So this is how it looks like, where you would have your codes, you create your repos and all like that. So we have Azure pipelines. So everything is sort of intertwined together. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to give you a whole delivery of infrastructure as code, kind of. On the later on, you understand what I mean. So, but Azure pipelines, it's more like that automation pipeline or work framework that helps you deploy your code. Once you deploy your code, you need a source and you need a destination. So that's what Azure Pipeline helps you. It's more like a CI/CD pipe. When you hear someone say CI/CD pipeline in your work environment, you're like, what are they specifically saying? So Azure Pipelines are automatically build and test code projects. It supports all major language and project types and combine continuous integration, continuous delivery, continuous testing to build, test, and deliver your codes to any destination at all. That's basically what it does. As you can see on the screenshot here, you can see pipelines. I'm going to show you what the mechanism behind pipelines, how it works. So I would backtrack so you can understand how I started. So remember, you Azure Boards, where you have your work item. Project manager assigns a work to you, or you have your own custom project, you create your project, and once your project is aligned, you have a unique user, maybe an epic number or a user ID number. The user ID number is related to that branch that is integrated to the branch, so you can identify what work you're working on. And once you create your pipeline would also recognize the branch you're working on, whichever feature branch or main dev or main branch of dev branch you're working on is going to recognize that. So with Azure pipelines, it helps you in delivering your codes to the destination. Take, for instance, your open source control repo or open source control code deployment repo is, let's say, either GitHub or Azure DevOps, right? Which Azure DevOps, you have your company is going to buy the enterprise agreement, license and subscription, obviously, and you get there, you need to start deploying. It's important that you need to make sure that your from an authentication perspective, you have your IDs, maybe a service account or a service principal ready. Once you want to deploy, you have your YAML file connection, and all those would relate to CI/CD, which I'm also going to talk more in this presentation. So you can see automate test, build, and delivery. So continuous integration, automate test, and delivery, it helps you in continuously deploying your codes, how you can build code faster by splitting test and build run, automatically ensure you don't ship broken codes, run test continuously. That's what continuous integration helps you to do. So once you have that pipeline where you know that for every SQL instance you want to provision, this is the spec, this is the specification of that instance or that product or platform or service you want to provision. I want to provision AKS, maybe Kubernetes services. I want to deploy a container in Azure. You would build the code and put it in your repo. I want to create a storage account. I want to create a virtual machine. I want to create an event hub log analytics. All those bunch of codes would be in your feature brand, and Azure pipeline would help you recognize those codes and deploy those codes to your destination provider, which provider could be AWS, it could be Azure, or whatever cloud services you want to use. So as you can see on your screen, you can see how the pipeline can be defined with a YAML syntax. So you edit your code, you edit your YAML files. So YAML files are sort of like a file where you set up some setting parameters to recognize what type of authentication you want to use. It might be an OAuth2 or more like a SAML authentication that you want to connect to your cloud destination tenant or subscription. So once you code all that in your YAML file, you can push it to your repo, your code repo, which is Azure Repo, where you have your feature branch or your user-specific branch that you created for yourself and that you want to update and push the code to a particular place. Then Azure Pipeline would help you deploy that code to your destination and see, do you have the right permissions? Are the code correct? Are the variables in line? Are your values available? Do you have the right permission? Are there policies in place in your destination that might restrict you? So you can test that deployment. Then once you test it, it validates that it's successful, then you can deploy that to whatever destination that you have, which probably is going to be Azure in this case, or AWS or on-prem. Then to deploy to the target, that's basically how Azure Pipeline works. The pipeline is versioned with your code. It follows the same branching structure. You get validation of your changes through code review in pull request and branch build policies. Every branch you can modify the pipeline by modifying your YAML file, your my YAML file, which is more like an Azure pipeline YAML file that you can use. You can change the build process which might also cause some breaks or some results that might cause some issues. So you can break a deployment where you can go back in to update your process. So in order for you to restrict or to foresee some other outcome, you don't want to deploy a dirty resource in Azure. So that's why it gives you that opportunity to actually test and destroy or break. I'm borrowing the word destroy because destroy, I'm going to be using the word destroy in a later topic in this conversation. But the word destroy simply means once you want to destroy your deployment, take for instance, once you deploy the resources and you want to break it down, because you did it in a sandbox, you want to break it down and deploy maybe in the staging up to production area. That's what it means. Then that's how you can set up that pipeline to work out off of as. And you can use either a GitHub repo or you can use an Azure DevOps to set up that pipeline, which is pretty much flexible. So this is more like an hypothetical situation. I always like giving people a hypothetical situation of how it actually works, right? You can see on your screen, you have a developer who, that's obviously you. You have a developer and you are assigned a task in an Azure board. Okay, let's work on a project called Cloud 2.0. Cloud 2.0 simply means that all applications will be moved to the cloud. So with that, you can create a user story for yourself, or you can create a user story for yourself and assign a work item to yourself where the task would describe what you do as a developer. Are you a SQL database administrator or a SQL, an Azure cloud engineer? You specify that task, then you can push your codes to GitHub, or GitHub. GitHub simply means that you could borrow a code from GitHub, or you don't want to use GitHub, you can use Azure DevOps to put that code in the repo where you want to deploy as is, or you want to change the code to modify it and push it to your destination. And you can see it from there. It goes to an Azure pipeline, which would authenticate with secret management. That's a different topic anyway. So once it authenticates using a YAML connection, so you can push that to an Azure environment. So ignore number 5 where you see Terraform, because I'm going to treat Terraform right after this. So once he pushes it to the cloud, he pushes them. Okay, let me do my mouse so you can see what I mean. So once he pushes it to the cloud, you can see it deploys whatever provisioning work you want to do. It could be an app service or it could be a SQL database. And remember that for you to deploy, you need more like an identifier, a token identifier, which would be related maybe to a service principal where you need to assign some permissions to, which is a different topic from a user management identity perspective. And once you deploy that pipeline, and Azure also gives you the capability to actually visualize those error logs with an Azure monitor, where you can actually see those logs. Even in the Azure pipeline, you can actually see the logs also in Azure Monitor. You can see both logs and see what was successful. Was anything broken? Was anything disallowed by policy? Or was a code in a wrong syntax for some reason you lost track of time? It would show you how that can be done. So that's how it is. Then this is also an hypothetical situation where you can see how everything works. And you can see from a developer perspective, you can deploy all the way using the pipeline over to a staging area and also to a production area. As long as you have your codes updated and you have your access right, then you know that you can deploy from source to destination, right? So right now I'm going to be talking more on infrastructure as code. So what I just did was Azure DevOps, which is more in comparison when it comes to IAC, which is infrastructure as code. Even if you are working with Azure Repo, you're working with Azure Boards, you're working with Azure Pipeline, it's important that you need to understand what IAC means. So because these are automation frameworks that you need to be aware of. So once you meet yourself in a fast-paced environment that is highly automated, automated processes in the environment, you will need to know how you can navigate what tools might be good for any use case, for any resource you want to deploy in the cloud. Where from an infrastructure perspective, we have automation tools like Ansible, we have Terraform, and we have Azure DevOps, which I just told you, I just went over Azure DevOps, but in the course, I'll also be touching more on Terraform, because right now, Terraform is the new IAC tool that sort of kind of getting far ahead even from an Azure pipeline perspective. It's a way advanced than Azure pipelines, but it still leverages Azure pipeline at some point when you are leveraging Azure Repo in that case. But this is infrastructure as code. Infrastructure as code it's more like when you have to manage your infrastructure or you want you to manage your provisioning state and you want it in an automated process. That's what IAC simply means. When you have your whole infrastructure, take for instance, you are net new in the cloud, your company is new in the cloud, and your company wants to start afresh to lift and shift all their infrastructure from on-prem to the cloud. So with an IAC module, you can use infrastructure as code to actually deploy your entire company environment to the cloud. It's very possible. So with infrastructure as code, that's where you build your production environments, development environments. And when I say environment, I'm saying what comprises of the entire environment, from your domain services to your instances, your applications, your databases, your credentials, Active Directory, access policies, all those infrastructure, you can deploy them using Terraform. So that's what Terraform actually offers, the version control, which version control is also important as an IAC, which your configuration files can be used as that automation tool to deploy your software codes as file. And deploying your infrastructure as code also means that you can divide your infrastructure into modular components that can then be combined in different ways through automation. Automation infrastructure provisioning with IAC means that developers don't need to manually provision things. You don't need to manage your servers. You don't need to operate on systems. You don't need to configure or manually go scale up a VM, or you manually scale up a VCore in a SQL database or a SQL instance or SQL managed things. You don't need to do all that with infrastructure as code, which could be Terraform, Ansible, or Azure DevOps. You can actually do those infrastructure piecework where you don't have to manually do a lot of work, and it takes your time. So a lot of companies are really focusing on Terraform. And right now in my even in my environment, my environment, I had to go learn even Ansible. I had to go learn so many provisioning on provisioning tools that you can use, even Jenkins, where you have to use Jenkins as an automation pipeline. So all these are required for even a SQL database to even know, because right now, if you don't know all these automation tools, you might not get a job. Trust me. If you're in a job and you can learn very, very fast, you might lose your job. So it's important that you learn what infrastructure as code simply means, because every environment is going in the route of lightweight and less management. They're trying to reduce the effort of ops work. When I mean ops, is operational work, where you have lots of people going to manually go and click and scale up or add more RAM, add more CPU, or in the cloud they have to go and add or change a pricing tier, or add more vCore to a database. So those ops work are changing because they want to use automation where either an IAC tool, which can be Ansible, can deploy those configurations, so you don't need to do anything. It's just lightweight, less management. So that's pretty much what that is. And as you can see, continuous delivery and continuous integration, like I said earlier on, is a practice whereby you use development teams to automate merging and testing code. Implementing CI helps you to catch bugs early in development cycle, which makes them less expensive to fix. So which is pretty much self-explanatory. So even if you are doing a lot of coding work, you are running, even if you're running a lot of work, even let's say select statement in a SQL, and let's say your boss tells you, oh, I need you to give me a report of what's on this database, and you don't need to start going to Management Studio, and you don't need to do that. You could deploy something to call a Power BI. You could deploy a Terraform script. You could deploy an Ansible playbook to send in a report to your email, or send in a report to a more like a SharePoint site, and you have that file. You can make a presentation of what the database is currently holding. So there are also different types of database flavor. Even if you can export from a SQL to a Cosmos that's open source and it's non-SQL, and get your data as it is, and you can present it to your boss, whatever that information that you want to provide to your team, whatever it is. Then continuous delivery, which is very important, because in order for you to reduce counters of issues, let's take, for instance, you are a young DBA, you have less experience, you don't know what much you are doing when you're running SQL script. Once you are able to follow this adoption framework where your codes are well polished, you review, you have a staging environment or a development environment where you build your code, even as little as let's say a backup status check script to check your backup status or whatever script that is, and you load those scripts in your repo, and you know these scripts are validated, and they tell you, oh, can we get a report? You just initiate your Terraform playbook, or your Ansible playbook, or you initiate a Terraform template to call that deployment, and it gives you the information you need, so you don't have more like a manual issue where you mistakenly run a truncated. So anything can happen. So that's what continuous delivery helps you to do, where you have a your well connected source control of codes, where they're well updated, and continuous delivery where you have your codes deployed from your source to your destination. It could deploy on-prem, it could deploy to the cloud, wherever your destination is, then you can deploy. That's what they basically mean. Yeah. So that's what infrastructure as code means. So which is Terraform. So Terraform is a new tool. You need to know what Terraform is. I'm going to do a little demo. I can show you how Terraform is being deployed, right? I can show you the demo, how it's been installed, how you can maybe tweak a config file. I can show you that during the demo session so you can see how it works. But it's important you need to know what Terraform is, how it's being used. It's an infrastructure as code tool, which is also like Azure DevOps and Ansible. As you can see, HashiCorp Terraform is an infrastructure as code tool that lets you define both both cloud and on-prem resources in human readable configuration file that you can version, reuse, and share, which is pretty easy. So it's trying to help you in having that user-friendly, readable interface where you can see how your codes are being deployed. There are many sample of codes out there in GitHub, in open source, where you can get in the open market where you can get your codes. So that's what Terraform helps you to do. It helps you where you can deploy in an hybrid environment where you have resource in it on-prem, you have resource in the cloud, and it can help you with that hybrid deployment continuously. And with Terraform, it can enable the definition, preview, and deployment of infrastructure code using Terraform. You create a configuration file using HCL syntax. The HCL syntax allow you to specify the cloud provider. So provider simply means it means the cloud provider, which could be AWS, it could be GCP, it could be Azure. So once you have those elements that mix that up, you can make up of your configuration files and you can deploy in whatever. You can have a multi-cloud environment, and Terraform is going to help you deploy it. So there are different differences to Azure DevOps, Ansible, Terraform, but Terraform is more like a bit, is a new coding base where it helps you to deploy multi-cloud. And if your environment has both on-prem, Azure, AWS, GCP, Terraform will deploy in all environments, and that's what you actually need. So that's basically once you verify the changes, you apply the execution plan to deploy the infrastructure. For more information, so you can get that on the website. I can show you, I can give you links to that. That's pretty self-explanatory also. So how does Terraform works? So Terraform creates and manages resources on the cloud platform and other services through the application programming interface, which is APIs. So there is an API call once you are deploying the Terraform. I'm gonna explain how it works, how you can build it. So once you are in a conversation where your company is going in, they are going into the approach of automation first, infrastructure as code deployment framework, where they want all engineers or developers to start using this tool, then you know how the conversation can lead to how you can contribute in the conversation. So as you can see, Terraform, there are two types. There's Terraform Cloud, and there's Terraform that you can install on your local device. So there are two deliveries of Terraform that you can deploy. So where it uses a lot of HTTP and triggers from Azure, or you can use an API call from Azure where both ends are connected, they are integrated to both sides. I can also explain what port numbers you can use to open, so you can have those source control server, let's say a control node that's sitting on AWS that you want to use as your source control where you want to deploy your code. You can integrate that to Azure where you want to deploy using Terraform. So you can see there are Terraform framework, which consists of write, plan, apply. So you can write your codes, you write your code from scratch, you can define your configuration. That's what we call config file. You can define what your configuration files are. With your configuration files where you specify your LAN ID or your user ID, you specify your repo configuration. If there is an access key that is needed for your get repo, you can apply that syntax in that config file where you can authenticate to Terraform so you can deploy your resources. And there is planned where once you have your config file, your root modules well defined, then you can have that pipeline, the Terraform pipeline, deploy your code. You can plan it. You can say, this is what I want to do. I want to create a subscription. Once I create a subscription, I want to create a resource group. Once I create a resource group, then I want to create a database. So you can plan your whole deployment from start to finish, how that will work. So you can basically do anything in the cloud, even on-prem, you can also do that, then apply. So once Once Terraform performs the proposed operation in the correct order, respecting any resource dependencies. So from there, you can apply your changes to you can apply your changes on your root modules. And once you apply your change on root module, then you can save that in your repo. So when I mean repo, I mean it could be Azure Repo, it could be GitHub repo. You could save your files there, right? So Terraform execution. So with this, this is the right plan and apply where your, as I said, configuration file and state file, where your company, or let's say your I always use company from a company perspective, not from a user, personal user case friendly perspective, but in a company perspective, your root modules will be set up, your state file where you want that your Terraform template to resolve on or resolve into. You can specify what the state file is, what source control node server is going to be sitting on. You can set that up. Once you have that defined, then you can plan it. Once you plan it by running a Terraform validate, Terraform validate, Terraform init to confirm that your binaries are up to date, you have the right extensions installed. I would go to the extensions and how to install all those things. Then once you do that, you can apply your providers. Do you want an Azure provider? You can specify what the provider is going to be. Do you want to use an AWS, GCP? So you can apply each of those providers and you can deploy those resources in the cloud. So that's how it is. So use case. I always like use case so you can basically understand how Terraform works. So take for instance, you're a developer and you have your repository in Git. So you could be here. You can have your repo here. So you can either have your repo here. Once you have your repo where you have your codes to deploy a SQL instance, database, log analytics, event hub, whatever the resource is, you can push that to an Azure DevOps. Let's say you can reference that to an actual board where you have an epic number. And also you can push that to your repo in Azure where the repo is also integrated to Terraform. And so you can make your certain changes where you create that. So once you have that deployed, you can deploy that to Terraform. Then Terraform would recognize that provider. Is it going to be Azure? Is it going to be AWS? And what resource do you want to provision? What infrastructure? So once you establish that provider, this is more like an Azure Cosmos DB or a SQL instance, then it would deploy to the cloud. It could be an Ansible playbook where you want to install a Tomcat or you want to install an application or do some necessary update in an application. You can use Ansible to deploy that to an Azure to Azure. So that's the way the actual framework works when I'm talking about CI/CD, continuous integration and continuous delivery. So that's basically how it works. And with this, that's how you can run your pipeline on Jenkins. Jenkins is another place you can run your pipeline on Jenkins where you will have a UCD pipeline created where it will point from an Azure DevOps repo and you write your code, your Terraform template. Let's say your local VS Code, you deploy that to your repo and you load that to your GitHub. GitHub checks that code, validates it, you do a pull request, then Jenkins can run that pipeline, deploy the resources in Azure. And once you deploy the resources in Azure, then you can have whatever resource you would need. So with Terraform, and once you have that resources, all of these resources deployed in the cloud, and it's just a sample or a test case, then you can do a Terraform destroy, where it would destroy all these resources and free up your resource group. So once you know you've validated that it can actually deploy it, so you destroy it and you save your company money. And once you know that's validated, then you keep that code in your staging area. So once that has been validated, you want to push to production, all you just need to do is come back to your codes, and modify it to the production variables. Let's say you want to deploy back to a production resource group. What's the production VNet, subnet? What's the production SQL database name? You update all your informations, you push that to your GitHub, you commit the change, and once it's been recognized, then Jenkins will run that pipeline and you deploy that to Azure in your production. So that's pretty much the functionality, how it helps you to deploy your infrastructure from start to finish. And this is how you can install it. You can, as I said initially, there are 2 ways you can deploy it to Terraform Cloud and also your local VS Code. I'm going to show you that during the demo. So this is how you install it. There are various extensions that are needed for Terraform that you need to have in your VS Code. And there are some codes you can actually deploy in order for you to have your syntax correct, your variable files, your TF files updated in your actual repo in your local or in the cloud. So that's how you can do that. And the configuration link, I'm going to post this link to everyone so you can go in and look at the link. You can see how it works. You can see how it works, what are the configuration, what are the prereq on having that installed in your local and also in your company, what are the prereqs from an enterprise perspective and also from a use case, user-friendly, from a user perspective that you need on your local device. So I would send this link. So questions and answers.